Welcome to another video, you guys. So in this video, I'm going to cover one of the best methods used not only to do well on your exams, but also to be able to retrieve the information for a longer period of time. And this is very critical to those who are in medical school, pharmacy school, nursing school, or any job that is involved in medical field, or in any other jobs that is requiring you to retain the information for a longer period of time. The reason why this is important, because let's say you're working in a clinic or the hospital and you do not want to review the policy that the hospital or clinic have in regard how to treat a patient. Every time you have a new patient, you do need to retain the information. Not only retaining information can help you prevent error, medical error. Let's say there is a drug-drug interaction. Having that information in the back of your head, you can look at something and be like, okay, I see it, I know how to deal with it. But if you're going to rely on writing everything and then looking at it, it's not only time consuming, actually can be fatal in some situation. So what do students actually do nowadays to help them learn the information, or what are the methods that students do? So before I jump into that, I want to introduce the method, and that is the spacing effect. Spacing effect, it's the method that is the best method used to retrieve the information. And I will go into that once I cover what students think when it comes into studying. So a lot of times students think that if I spend longer period of time studying, therefore I know the information. And one of the examples is that students sometimes when they're having, like, let's say a new lecture in biology, let's take that as an example. You went to your lecture and your professor assigned you to read the chapter and you're going to be having a quiz on it next week. What do you do sometimes, which I actually have done myself before in the past, is that you go to the library and you say, I'm going to stay in the library for 10 hours today and cover the whole chapter. I'm not leaving the library until I master the chapter. And here is what we think. We think that once I go to the library and cover the chapter all together and go home, I feel good. I covered it. I stayed there 10 hours. I was reading the chapter, But in reality, when the exam or quiz comes in, the result is not as good as you expected. And you're like, what's going on? Why is this actually happening? I studied 10 hours in the library. Why is this not even working? Well, here's why. The reason why, because the first time you're studying, your neurons are trying to make connection with the information. They're trying to make sense out of it. And how do you think the connection will be the first time? Regardless of the period, if you spend 1 hour or 10 hours on that day, do you think it's going to be weak or strong? Well, probably it's going to be weak. The connection here between neurons, it's actually not as strong as one would think. So when these neurons are connecting, they're making a little connection when you're exposing yourself to the topic you're studying. So they're making this kind of connection, but it's really weak. It's not as strong as you would think it is. And this is why many students think that when they actually, another example would be rereading or cramming, would give them the best result. Well, maybe in the short period of time when you reread the material, if it's not a lot of material just before your quiz, like 2 or 3 hours, or cramming just the night before, you end up doing well. And I've done it myself one time. When I was studying for one of the quizzes, I didn't really have the time to study, so I ended up cramming the whole chapter just the night before the quiz. And I did well. I got a 95% on the quiz. I was happy, but here's what happened. When the test, the exam, the final came in, when I was looking at the information, I was like, well, I cannot remember the information. Why does it seem to me that this is like a brand new information? Like, why am I spending more time right now trying to learn it? It's basically I'm relearning the information. That's what's happening. And the reason why, because in the first time when I came in, I crammed the information. It's just the effect of the short-term memory. That's all what it is. I did not actually learn the information. The connection between my neurons wasn't that strong to keep that information in my brain. It's not as effective. It's not as an effective method to use when it comes into rereading or cramming. This is why such methods never works if you want to retain the information for longer period of time. So let's get into the spacing effect now. So a spacing effect was first described by Hermann Ebbinghaus in 1885, and what they did several experimenting, trying to see, well, what happened if somebody had an exposure to certain topic several times during the week in comparison to someone who just had one setting, went over the chapter, let's say for 10 hours, just like our friend who went to the library, or myself who went to the library once and stayed there for 10 hours. Well, they did that, and they found that the exposure time to a topic, it's actually was solidate these connection. So what happened, the more you see the topic you're covering, let's say that chapter you were studying for biology, the more you see it, the more you see the information, even if it's 1 hour per day, let's say you see that information 3-4 times a week, it's actually makes stronger connections. So these connections shift from a weak one to a strong one. And what happened, they're becoming more solid, they become more strong as you're reviewing these information. And the more you do it, the stronger they become. And it's actually easier for you to remember the information for the final or the midterm that you're having. This is why the exposure effect or exposure time, it's very critical if you actually want to retrieve the information in longer period of time. Because when you're studying as a medical student or pharmacy student, nursing student, you do not want to just study for the exam itself. Well, it's great to do well on exam, but you want to apply this information when you're graduating, when you're having the job. You do not want to go and restudy your notes. Especially in the medical field, everything changes. In pharmacy field, drug changes, everything changes, and you do not want to restudy it because things are changing. So you do want to develop a method where you can retain the information for longer period of time. So when new information comes in, you're just gonna add it to the box that you have in your brain. You're not gonna retrain yourself all over. And to take an example of that, when you're like having a new job and you're hired for a new job, they're training you, and there is one task in the job. The task requires you to do something in the job, and for that specific task didn't happen until the month after. So once you were hired, you were trained to do something, let's say in the computer, some function, and that job didn't happen again until the next month. Do you think you're gonna remember what you did the first time in training? Probably not, because you did not practice it. That's why when we're comparing like two people, let's say someone who was hired and he's been working for a month, and someone who's been working for the same job for 10 years, who do you think between these two people would do a better in terms of retrieval, or let's say applying the technique when it comes in, let's say saving life in a hospital? Who do you think, which of them would be way faster when it comes in treating that patient? Probably the one with 10 years experience, because he's seen it so many times. He knows it. He doesn't need to rethink about it. And that's the point, is that he doesn't think he knows it. He applies it right away. Just like when you're driving, first time when you're learning how to drive, you're like, oh, when should I hit the brake? When should I do this? When should I do this? When you're actually driving for over a year or two, you don't even think about it. When you're driving on the freeway, you don't even think about it. When you need to stop, you stop. When you need to move, you move. You don't think about it. And that's the power of training. That's the power of exposure. And it's the same thing when it comes into studying. It's the same method. You just need to follow this technique in order to ace your learning, in order to be able to retrieve this information for a longer period of time. So I said that retention increases with time. So what do I mean by that? So how can you actually use this method? Let's say in learning. So let's say you're going to your college, you're like in the first week of your classes. So what do you do to ace this method and to apply it in longer period of time? So let's say you're taking, let's say, infection disease, ID. So your professor gives you a chapter to read, Okay, so this is basically here we're Sunday, and this is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So basically you have the information for that lecture, infection disease or ID, prior to the Monday. So what are you gonna do to ace this method? So the first thing you need to do is basically go over the lecture, you just go over the slide. If they gave you a PowerPoint slide, you go over the slide and you do not spend so much time on it. Let's say they gave you 40 slides. What are you gonna do? You're just gonna go over it really quick, 20, 15 minutes, or maybe half an hour max. You're just trying to see what the lecture is on. Let's say it's on meningitis. Okay, well, I'm gonna go see what meningitis is, just have an idea. You're not gonna memorize, you're not gonna trying to make notes on it or anything, you're just gonna read it. That's it, half an hour, and try to make it before the class. So this is exposure number 1. And then after the class, what you do is that you rewrite, or actually, rewrite the important notes. So you went to class and then, you had a general idea what the lecture is on, and then you took the class, and then you took all the notes, and when you go after the class, you just rewrite it just to make sure that you didn't miss anything. I don't mean rewriting like you're rewriting the whole PowerPoint lecture. No, just rewriting what the professor said that it wasn't on the lecture itself. And then after that, so this is the second time exposure over here. So we have a first time over here before the class, second time during the class when you were taking notes, and then after it. And then before, third time would be before you sleep. What are you doing the third time? You just go over the lecture one more time. So in comparison to the average student, what an average student would do, will come to class and get an exposure to the lecture during the class. And that student probably gonna wait or just, not feel like, I don't feel like studying. So we'll just wait to the exam or quiz a couple days and then restart relearning all the material. When you actually have 3-time exposure, these 3-time exposure makes stronger connection in your brain. And most students, when they do these 3 times exposure, actually helps them so much when it comes in to the week before the final, midterm, or quizzes. It does an amazing job that you can actually, I do not have to relearn the material. I know the material. So what is the thing that you need to do to cover other classes? So it's the same method. You follow this method for every single class. Let's say you have a second day on Tuesday, a biology class. So you do 3 times. You do the first time before class, second time during the class, you're just trying to engage, ask question, and then after the class you rewrite your information, and then third time would be basically before you go to sleep. And you follow this all during the week for every single class you take. Now, coming to the spacing effect, how does it work? So before you start the spacing effect, you do need, as you go through the lecture 3 times, you probably have a good knowledge. You probably understand the lecture right now. And if you don't, try to understand the lecture and have a basic knowledge, not to memorize it or not to, trying to push yourself to have it back in your brain, but more of just to have a general understanding of the lecture. Once you do that, then you're good to go to move on to the spacing effect, because you cannot move into the spacing effect if you can't understand the lecture. You're probably just going to end up memorizing things and without even understanding. And when it comes into memorization without understanding, it's going to be really hard to apply during exam, because if you have a complicated patient, or patient comes in and you've memorized it one way and the patient comes in a different way, you're going to be like, I have no idea how to apply this method because I do not understand the knowledge, just memorized it. So understanding is very important before starting the spacing effect. So what happened? Let's say now you learned it all the first time, right? 3 exposure, it's great. Now we're moving, let's say, to week 2 or week before the final. And we have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So what are you going to do in this time? So when it comes into spacing effect and how does it work, here's what you're going to do. You're going to take the infection disease lecture. You've gone over it already. You understand it. You're going to study it for 1 hour. So you're going to schedule 1 hour during Monday, okay? In the morning, let's say you have a time, you're going to go over the morning AM. You're going to go for 1 hour. You're going to cover what you covered in that chapter for 1 hour. You do not have to master. You just go over it and trying to retrieve it, make questions out of it, and trying to answer this question without looking at your paper, without looking at your notes. And then do the same thing. Do not look at your notes. This is the power of spacing. How it works is that you do not need to look at your notes and just reread it. You want to retrieve it without looking at your notes. And this is why it's important to trying to recall all the information. Let's say you were studying neurons. Well, what is one question about neurons? How do they connect? You explain it in your own words and you put it in that perspective. Once you do that, you have a better, solid understanding of the material. So you do that in the morning and you do it one time at night. Let's say you do 2 hours here and this is in PM. So you did it on Monday. Now what are you going to do? You're going to let it go to the spacing effect, which is letting the information to be forgotten. You do not want to just review it second day. You need to forget the information. And this is basically depending on the person. Every person is different. Some people will take them, let's say, because they had a 3 exposure, would take them 2 days to forget the information. Some other people take them longer. So depending on the person, but on average, it takes a day between them. And you do not forget everything. You basically forget some information, and that's okay. So you come right now to Wednesday. And what are you going to do on Wednesday? You're going to come again, and maybe in the PM right now, starting like, let's say 1 PM or afternoon, not a PM. Let's say in the afternoon. Let's say 1 PM. You're going to come and review the same material. You're going to retrieve it. You're going to recall it again at 1 PM. And then you do the same thing at night. And what happened between this time, let's say you spend 1 hour, here you're going to spend 45 minutes instead. Because you know the information, you do not want to spend the same amount of time just like you did the first time. The longer you go, or the more days it comes in, you want to spend less time. And that's the power of spacing effect. And then at PM time, what are you going to do? You're going to do another 45 minutes. So you did that on Wednesday, and now you're like, oh, well, I know the information well, so maybe I'm not going to review it on Thursday or Friday. I'm going to go Saturday. Right? And what happened with every time you're reviewing, you do not review everything. Let's say you were studying that chapter of biology. You do not study the whole chapter all over again. You focus on the thing that you couldn't remember. So let's say you did the 3 times exposure. Now on Monday, you can actually go over the whole chapter if you couldn't remember everything. But if you could remember things from the chapter and recall it right away, then you don't have to review it. You can review the information that you know 3 days or 4 days after, but focus on the things that you do not remember. And then as you go on, you do the same thing. You only focus on things that you do not remember well, and you keep the other things. So things that you remember, you leave them for later. Let's say you review them once in a week. But the other things that you do not remember, you do review them 2 or 3 times a week, and you leave a couple of days in between just to allow the process that you're actually letting go of the information and coming back. The more you do this, the stronger the connection between your neurons will be. And the longer you do this, let's say you do it for the week before the final, and I have tried it myself, actually works really well. So once you do it here on Friday, let's say you actually spend 30 minutes because you know the information. You're like, well, I know the information. I don't have to go 45 minutes or 1 hour. That's it. I'm good. And then you do, maybe or maybe not. You probably don't have to do it again at night. You're basically done over here. When Monday comes in, you're just basically going to take the exam and do well. That's the power of spacing effect. And after, let's say you finish your class, you took that biology class, you're done from school, but you do need to know the information when it comes into future job. So what do you do after that? You don't let it go. You go on and then review this once in a week, or maybe once in every 2 weeks. And the longer you do this, it's probably going to end up being like once in a month, or maybe once in every 2 months. Just like remembering your name. If somebody can ask you, what's your name? You're probably gonna, boom, just say it right away because, you know, it's been a lifetime, you know your name. It's the same thing when it comes into studying. The longer you practice it, not in one session, of course not, the longer the exposure, the many times of the exposure you have it, the better it is. And that's how you prepare for the normal days and the days before the exam. This is what you apply the spacing effect to have a better result, not only for the exam itself, but also in terms of a longer period of time to recall all this information for your future job. If you have any question, please leave them in the comment below, and thank you for watching.